Let me just pull up my PowerPoint here. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Today, thank you so much for joining me today for Smart Assessment Real World Learning AI Generated Tasks. I'm super excited to be here. My name is Ashley Berry. I am a psychology professor over at Golden West College, and I also teach at CSUDH in Los Angeles. And I'm the CEO and founder of the Higher Ed Institute, a educational consulting firm that tries to bring together educators like yourself who are curious and excited to learn new sort of pedagogy and methodologies. And, in spaces like this where we can kind of share and collaborate amongst each other. So I hope everybody's ready to talk because I'm going to ask you guys some questions. So the purpose of the Higher Ed Institute, we do all kinds of really cool trainings. We do stuff on universal design, project-based learning, authentic assessment, and then teaching with tech, which is what we're going to be talking about today, and a super passion of mine. So glad I get to share it all with you. Just to kind of go over some of these faculty learning outcomes. So we're going to be defining authentic assessment and distinguishing it from traditional assessment methods in higher education contexts. We're going to identify key challenges that students face in transitioning from academic learning to real-world job performance. We're going to you're going to see me design an authentic assessment task that aligns with specific learning outcomes and reflects real-world professional tasks. But before we get started in traditional higher ed fashion, we're going to do a quick little icebreaker because I kind of want to get to know, or I want to get an idea of who in the audience is familiar with authentic assessment and who is kind of in the gray area or has no idea and has never heard of it. So originally I had a poll set up for you guys, but unfortunately it's not going to work. So what I'm going to do is have you guys take a look at six prompts that I created and just kind of, think about which one of these prompts would represent authentic assessment in the classroom and which ones do not. And then, I'll ask you guys to share your thoughts and then we'll go over it. So I'll give everybody about a minute to just read over these. So before I go to the next slide and, we talk about what is and what isn't in the context of what you guys are learning about today, do any of these stand out as authentic assessment or not authentic assessment? Anybody want to take a swing at this?
This is Linda. E and F look like authentic assessments to me. Over.
Yeah, I would say you're spot on, Linda. Thank you. Is there anybody who can identify what is not authentic assessment? Or what could be arguably not authentic assessment, I should say, because I guess there is a way to make it authentic assessment, but how it's read.
Hi, this is Karen Madison. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Karen. Thank you.
In my opinion, I would say that A and C are not authentic. Those are not things that I would do in a job situation. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Yeah. So you guys were right. So A, C, and D are not considered authentic assessment if we're talking about the way that, or what we're going to be discussing today as authentic assessment, which is skills building in real life scenarios, right? And the reason why, I think that there's a little bit of gray area in D, right? Because orally summarizing the article you're assigned for homework could be considered authentic assessment if there is a like critical thinking aspect of it, like if you're applying theory or something that you're learning within the classroom context, it could be considered authentic assessment. But just orally summarizing it, not really, that's not really considered authentic assessment. But what is, you know, creating a lesson plan, having students create a reel or a TikTok that explains how the body responds to exercise, writing a letter to your local school board arguing for or against banning a controversial book, all things that are considered authentic assessment. And I will get into the how and the why in just a few slides. Okay, so I wanted to start off with a bit of an anecdotal story before I get into some of the thick data and the research that I did on authentic assessment. So a few years ago, I was the coordinator of the Guardian Scholars Program. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's a program that supports current and former foster youth in the community college system, and then I think there are some in like the UCs and the Cal States as well. But we offer them all kinds of resources, gas cards. We make sure that they have access to groceries at the food bank. We give them books. There's a whole list of things, and one of the things that I really tried to get my students to do is to apply for jobs, right? Because they needed to get some real world experience in the working world. And they also just needed to make money because they didn't have a family to fall back on. And so I would go down to our career fair every year and I would collect business cards and I would chat with employers. And one year I decided to really engage in that conversation with them because I noticed that so many of my foster youth struggled when they did get jobs, right? Like, what is it, why couldn't they keep those jobs for very long? What is the perspective of the employer about what they needed to improve on? And when I started asking them those questions, they told me that a lot of these students were missing soft skill sets, right? That they were really struggling to communicate, collaborate, critically think, problem solve, etc. Right? So I apologize, I have this cough that just won't go away. So, I at the time I was also I was a classified and I was also teaching. I've been teaching for about 8 years. And I thought to myself, well, why is that? Why are they missing this really big piece where they're struggling to connect or they're struggling to use some of these soft skills in their work environment? And so recently, as I was putting this together, I was thinking about like how I as a professor can create the circumstances for them to build soft skills in my class while emphasizing content mastery. So I was looking online and I found this employability report by Cengage Group, and I was not surprised to see that 2-3 years later students are still not, 20% of or almost 20% of the respondents did not feel that college prepared them for their first job. Over 50% of the respondents said that they didn't apply because they didn't feel qualified for whatever job that they were applying for. And, or they did not, over 40% of students did not apply due to perceived lack of skill sets, right? So I did a little bit more digging, and I found out that the employers that I talked to were not the only ones that were, echoing the sentiment of sort of disappointment about recent college graduates, right? We have, and these are just, by the way, these are just a couple of the big name companies that are sort of engaging in this trend where they have created training programs and they're recruiting young people, so they're going to high schools, they're going to colleges, and they're essentially saying, we don't require a bachelor's degree for you to get into some of these entry level positions. We have created a training program, 3 to 6 months. You learn all of these technical skills on top of the soft skills that you need to be successful, right? And then we will give you a really great starting salary, and we'll give you opportunity to grow within the company, right? And I think that this is really important for us to consider as educators, because, and not to get super political on everybody, but the political climate that we're in right now is asking us to prove our worth, right? And I think at one point there was, there was this idea that the holistic liberal arts education was important to create like the well-rounded citizen, right? That was kind of the idea of education, which was great when students didn't have to put themselves into, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars worth of debt, right? Now we have students. Oh, I think Arturo. Oh, okay. um, it was great at a time when students didn't have to put themselves in thousands and thousands of dollars worth of debt, but now students are asking, what is my actual return on investment? Like, what am I taking with me aside from, the education piece, or this piece of paper that tells me that I finished college? What are the other things that are helping me to actually be successful and to later pay off all of these loans that I've accumulated over the 4 to 6 years that I've been in college for, right? And so this became super, super important to me as an educator, because I wanted to be able to say that they left my classroom with some really tangible skill sets. So what is authentic assessment? So it's authentic assessment refers to the evaluation of student learning through real-world tasks that require application of knowledge, critical thinking, and problem-solving skills in contexts that mirror professional or everyday life. Okay, so what authentic assessment is not is rote memorization of facts, or as we like to call it in higher ed, drill and kill, right? So this idea of absorbing definitions, summarizing something that we've read without applying it to real world scenarios. And honestly, when we memorize facts just based on the fact that we have to memorize them, we don't usually hang on to them. I can't tell you like how many times in my undergrad experience where, I had a test and I had to, memorize a bunch of definitions, or I had to like figure out the stages and steps to some theory that I was learning in my psychology class. And I would cram the night before, learn everything I needed to learn for the test so that I could get the A. And then within 3 days, had you asked me to repeat any of that, I probably, maybe 25% of what I had studied, I could tell you about, right? And so that's what students are looking at now with the type of assessment that requires them to just memorize knowledge, right? There isn't a whole lot of application involved, and because of that, there isn't a whole lot of content mastery that's taking place, right? And so one of the things that I love about authentic assessment is that it requires students to heavily engage with the material, which allows them to be more likely to hold on to some of that content, or more of it than they would if it was just memorizing it. Okay, so I am a major theory nerd. Every single thing that I do, lesson planning wise, has to do with using some type of, theoretical framework to back up my reasoning for why I'm doing it. And so it took me a while to find a learning model that made a lot of sense and was built around this idea of the authentic assessment. And so I came across the constructivist learning model. And what I love about this model is that it centers the student in our lesson plans, right? So everything that we do is based on, the student essentially. So when I'm thinking about projects that I want to create that are authentic, I'm considering student culture. So for example, we know that a lot of our younger students, right, the Gen Z and then the incoming alphas are they're digital natives, right? They grew up around the internet. They were iPad babies most likely. They they're always on their phone, which we can see in our own classrooms, right? And so I try to think about how can I build projects or activities where they're comfortable like using their phone to do the work, or they can do something on social media. The same goes with, because I mean we have to think about students that aren't Gen Z or aren't digital natives. uh, if I'm doing a project, I might give them if I'm creating a project, I might give them the option to do a PowerPoint presentation, which millennials and Gen Xers grew up on, right? Like we've created so many of these PowerPoint presentations, right? So that's something that they're more comfortable with. So student culture, student experience and background. Again, I get students from ages 17 all the way to 50. And so some of those are going to have a lot of experience that they're bringing into the classroom, and others are going to have limited experience, but all experience is valued, right? And so I try to give them the opportunity to use some of that in the projects that I create. Active engagement, that's an obvious one. And I'll talk about ways that I actively engage them. Student perspective. So I'm big on equity. So recognizing that students come from like different cultural backgrounds, they were raised differently, they have different worldviews. And so I allow for a lot of student perspective in these projects. And then obviously student constructed. So this allows for students to get really creative when they're doing these projects, and problem solving, which is another skill that they're going to hopefully take into the work environment. Okay, so, theory is really abstract. So I like to give folks kind of an example of a project that I do in my own classroom. So I teach psychology, and a lot of the students that I get in that class are pre-nursing majors, or if they're not pre-nursing, they're interested in some kind of healthcare career. So like healthcare administration, therapy, counseling, something having to do with like physical or mental health, right? So a lot of my projects are typically based on public health. Um, I do give them other options for other things. Like sometimes, in one chapter, I'll give them a few different projects that they can choose from, because not all of them are going to do public health. But for the most part, I'm getting a lot of students who are going to be entering into the public health field. So for this one, I did imagine you're a public health educator who's been asked to put together a campaign to help a group of elderly adults better understand some of the biggest health challenges occurring in their age group. So I'll give them examples: heart disease, cancer, social isolation, poor mental health, etc. Okay, so the first piece of this is that I put together one of the following visuals with minimal explanations and maximum visuals. And I'll talk about why there's minimal explanation on the next slide. But this hits on a couple of different things. So I talked about student culture, right? So the Instagram carousel, they might be way more comfortable doing that than they are building a slide deck or creating a brochure on Canva. Um, or they might be, I might get a couple of creative students who love Canva and they want to create a brochure and infographic. I like to give them different sort of options. And this kind of plays into the fact that um, in the public health industry, they're going to be creating marketing materials. They're going to be talking about these things, right? And so later on, this is going to be things that they can bring into the interview process, or to display or create some kind of portfolio that they can show their employers when they go to apply for a job, right? Oops. Okay. And then what I have them do is, after they create that visual, right, which hits on creativity, it hits on the critical thinking, because they have to go in and they have to use theory to create some of those materials. They have to explain, you know, they have to talk about, like, they might have to talk about Erickson's psychosocial stages of development and talk about where those elderly folks are in that stage of development and how their physical and mental health really works to influence those stages, right? And then I'll have them record a video. So for my online classes, I'll have them record a video and post it on the discussion board that answers frequently asked questions, explains your visual, gives elderly resources they can turn to. So this gives them the opportunity to do some like public speaking. A lot of my students are really uncomfortable with public speaking, but in the digital age where remote work is going to be the norm for a lot of our students, I want them to get comfortable sitting in front of a camera and talking about these things as though they would if they were on the job. And then I ask students to engage with each other's posts by talking about what information the most relevant to them in their own lives or how they could use it in future work. And this takes into account that perspective piece. So, you know, obviously not all of my students are at the stage where they're developing things like heart disease, right? Well, hopefully they're not. A lot of them are younger, but they can talk about working with patients that have had heart disease or cancer. They can talk about their experience working, you know, having an elderly family member that had that, right? And so again, by making it personal, they're able to connect with that material, and it makes it more memorable. The other thing that employers really complain, one of the other thing that employers really complained about was the idea that students had a really hard time receiving constructive feedback when they were in the workplace. So I might have students look at other students' work and, you know, take a look through their brochure or through their Instagram carousel and give them feedback on things that they could have improved upon, right? Like, you missed some of these really important cancer statistics, or there was a whole list of resources in, you know, the back of the chapter that that you could have added to this piece of your brochure, right? And so it gets them in the habit of hearing how they can improve, like what they could have added, so when they're in the workspace, they can use, you know, they can take that critical feedback or that constructive criticism with a little bit more with a little less I don't know, they won't get offended, or well, we hope they won't anyways. And then for my in-person and my hybrid classes, I have them physically get into groups and take turns talking about their projects, because I mean, especially if I have a hybrid class, I don't like spending the only time that I have with them just lecturing. I like them engaging critically with each other. So I'll usually have them get into groups and talk about their projects. Um, So, so this really, you know, this whole idea of classroom material plus authentic assessment and how it translates into the work environment, right? This idea that they're collaborating with each other, they're giving each other constructive feedback, they're communicating, they're learning how to public speak, they're problem solving. So one of the big gripes that I get, especially for my online class, is that students will have like a hard time like uploading a video to Canvas, right? If the memory is too big, it takes them forever. So they'll go, you know, professor, how do I get this on there so that I can get the grade? And I'll throw the problem back at them. I'll go, well, how would you do it if you didn't have me answering that question for you? Where could you upload the video and then, you know, attach the link so that we still had access to it, but you don't necessarily have to directly upload it to Canvas. And they'll go, oh, YouTube, or you know, Canva has a video upload feature as well. And so this idea that it forces them to think about how to problem solve and how to troubleshoot is really important. Or, you know, I get some folks who are like, I've never used Canva, I don't know how to create an infographic. Okay, well, how can we fix that? What are the ways that you can learn how to create an infographic that you don't necessarily need to lean on me for? And they'll go, well, you know, I'll go onto the Canva website and I'll look up a tutorial. Perfect, great. Or you can Google it on, you can go onto AI and you can ask them for a step-by-step process on how to create an infographic, and it will give you like a whole list, right? So that idea of kind of forcing them to problem solve, critically think, and then they're gaining a lot of great technical skills by creating these materials. All right, so real quick, I just wanted to check in. Now that you guys are aware of what authentic assessment is there anyone in the audience who is already doing something similar in their classroom? And if they are, like, how's it going? Have you, noticed a change in your students? So TL Brink?
Yes, I'm really pleased that your example was from gerontology. That happens to be my clinical specialty. So I was very pleased to see that. I teach entirely online, and most of my students are EMTs and CNAs. They want to be nurses and social workers. What I have found is giving on the discussion board a lot of prompts that deal with actual clinical type situations and how they should handle it, or giving them articles written in medical, nursing, or social work journals about how do they interpret the data. And I'm more interested in not so much which answer they come up with, but I want to see them give the why, the explanation behind it. Because in a real life situation, they'll be in a team, a multidisciplinary team. And what they're going to have to do is to explain, using the terms and the theory of this course, lifespan development, to other members of the team who have been trained perhaps in other kind of clinical or human services specialties. I find this works very good in an online asynchronous environment using the discussion board. I like the suggestion you've made that they have many different options for submitting their work, videos, Instagrams, or just plain text messages.
So can I ask you, how has the response from your students been? Do you feel like it's been overall positive that they like this mode of learning?
Well, that's what my students tell me. Now, of course, in an online course, we're going to see some students drop out because they want a simple course where they just look at lectures and take multiple choice exams. And I think they realize very quickly with me that they've got to do a project or really get on that discussion board every day. So some students are very happy, and they'll take me for the next course in the series. They like the relevance of the way I package it for their future careers. Others, drop out. I don't think my retention rates are any worse or any better than my colleagues who have less of a clinical or practical orientation in their class.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Marlene?
Good morning. So I teach digital literacy for our continuing ed at Santa Ana College. And I love that you bring this up because that's kind of how I like to teach just most of the materials that I teach in general. But one of the things that I do and that my students really, really love is they're learning how to navigate through the internet. So they're learning how to use Google and how to search and find, reliable information and whatnot. So we do a project every semester where we plan a vacation. So I ask them to plan a vacation where they want to go. They'll go into Expedia and different websites, Kayak, and look into airfares and hotels and stuff. And so they do a lot of like real life type of work. And they really, really like that because I often find them asking me like, well, how do I, rent a car and this and this and that. And so we kind of go into those discussions. So I think it's really, really cool. And then it also just keeps them engaged. So I love that you're bringing up this concept. I think it's really important.
Thank you. Thank you both for volunteering that. I love hearing how it's going in other professors' classes, because as I said, this has been a relatively new concept for me in the last few years. Totally switching the way that I teach students and like basically redesigning my entire classroom. So I love hearing when other folks are doing it and how it's going for them, because I know that this is oftentimes like a foreign concept for a lot of faculty. Well, what do you mean I don't give don't give them multiple choice? Which I'm not saying that multiple, like I said, multiple choice, there's nothing wrong with like those exams, right? I just want to make sure in my classrooms that they're leaving with something that they can use. So, you know, to each their own, right? Not trying to put anybody down. So one of the things I am a self-proclaimed AI evangelist. I use this all the time. It has made redesigning my courses so much easier. Now, I do have some boundaries when it comes to AI. I've never used it to like do any grading or anything like that, but I generate a lot of really cool ideas using AI because I couldn't possibly scour the entire internet if I wanted to and find all of the really cool ideas that are on it. So AI is kind of my way of gathering all of that together. Now, I know I probably have a couple of skeptics on here or folks who've never used it before. That's okay. You don't have to use it to do this. It just will make your life simpler. So here is what you're going to need to get started. So an understanding of the most popular industries in your discipline, projects in those industries that require the skills that you want to learn. And we're going to go over all that. I have a little video that I'm going to show you that I created. I use my course outline of record. I know not everybody has like access to the actual curriculum. I know this is big in community colleges, but for like Cal States and UCs, when I've taught at a Cal State, I wasn't given a course outline of record. So for the community college, this has been my absolute Bible. And at my institution, we're good about keeping these updated. We do it every 5 years. And it helps me to really narrow down what types of projects that I want to create based on the outline, based on the objectives, based on the SLOs, and so on and so forth. Obviously, my student learning outcomes are huge. I have 3 for the developmental psych class that I teach, and each one of those has its very own project to make sure that I'm hitting those SLOs every semester. And then I also have, for every single chapter that we go over, I have like more bite-sized learning objectives that I use to kind of break down those, to break down projects essentially into, like I said, smaller bite-sized pieces. And then, obviously the chat bot is optional. But today, if you've never used it before, you're gonna learn how to do it. So without further ado, I'm gonna play this for you. And sometimes I like to do these tutorials live, but if I have time, I usually will record a video so that you guys don't have to like furiously take down notes. If this is something that you do want to do, you can go back to my YouTube channel. You can watch this anytime. The prompts are actually in the summary section of the video. So if you didn't want to rewatch it, you could just scroll down to the prompts. But yeah, I have this here so that you can refer back in case this is something you want to do later.
There's no sound.
I'm sorry?
Oh, there's no sound.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Hang on. So they told me how to do this and I did it.
Actually, just share your sound.
I'm sorry?
When you share your you can choose the sound.
Okay. Let's see if this worked.
I think you're sharing the sound, just the volume is very low.
Oh, it's low?
Yeah, you could hear like a whisper kind of a thing. So I think that's
Oh, maybe should I try to go straight to YouTube and see if maybe that works better?
try
Let me
that.
see if I can go straight to YouTube.
Could we have a link to that video in the chat if you don't mind?
Yeah, absolutely.
Since I'm most
Oh, there we go.
Is it better?
Oh yeah, much better.
Okay, I'll send the link right after. educators, for today's brief tutorial, we'll explore how to design authentic, career-aligned assignments using AI tools. Since I'm most comfortable navigating ChatGPT, that's a program that I'll be using today, but you can use Claude, Copilot, or any other large language models that suit your needs. Let's go ahead and get started. So for starters, I think the most helpful thing that I've been able to do is to train my chatbot by identifying industry-related roles and projects. So a prompt that I might use is, what are the top industries and entry-level job titles in said discipline? What projects do these roles typically involve that require critical thinking, problem solving, communication, and technical skills? This inquiry helps align assessments with actual industry expectations. This will also help to give you an idea about what type of projects to expect ChatGPT to recommend once we input your course, your unit, or your chapter objectives. But we'll get there in just a few steps. So just a bit of a side note, I do consider myself an AI evangelist, but I'm also a healthy skeptic, and I question all of the output that these large language models produce me with, and I highly recommend that you do the same. I almost always request recent data to support these trends. So I might put a prompt in that says, provide current research articles that point to data from the past decade, highlighting trends in that's where you would input your discipline, focusing on entry-level roles and essential skills they demand. Now, in my case, usually ChatGPT will come up with a list of current articles that they pull their sources from with clickable links to those articles. Now, just a little disclaimer, I do pay for the most recent version of ChatGPT, so I'm not sure if this is also available in the free version, but it doesn't hurt to give it a try. For step 3, you're going to use your course objectives, your chapter objectives, your unit objectives, whichever objectives that you want to use in order to create your authentic assessment. And you're going to put a prompt into your large language model that's something along the lines of, given these industry roles and projects and considering the following learning objectives, I typically use about 2 to 3 for every assignment that I give them. Suggest a list of authentic projects with detailed instructions that align with these objectives. This step is really critical because it tailors your assessments to both academic goals and industry needs. So the final step in the project is to review the AI generated projects. I typically ask for at least 5 just so that I have a variety, and select those that best fit your course. Also, I typically tend to modify the instructions to match my classroom policies and to match student needs. And you can do this by adjusting the scope, the deliverables, or the collaboration requirements as necessary. So that about does it, educators. I hope you're able to gain something valuable about creating authentic assessment using AI tools. If you like this video, make sure to like, follow, and subscribe. All right, so let me go back to this. Yeah, so at the end, I have my very last slide. There's a QR code where you can find all of my YouTube video tutorials on there. I have all kinds of cool stuff that you can look through. I also have a podcast if you're interested on all things higher ed and pedagogy. But we'll get to that in a minute. So I don't like doing these trainings as kind of pretending that there are no downsides to the methodology that I'm using, because there's always going to be an upside and always going to be a downside. So I wanted to share some of what those cons are with you. And then I also wanted to talk about some solutions that I've been able to implement, as a way of combating some of these cons, right? So authentic assessment, the unfortunate thing about it is that it's impossible to assess every chapter or every unit outcome. Even if you're offering like an option between 1 or 2 different, 2 or 3 different projects, students are only going to choose one, right? And so they're only going to be creating that project based on the outcomes that you chose for that particular project. So there is this idea of depth over breadth. But again, I feel like when you ask students to engage deeply into you know, a knowledge source and, you know, create a project out of that, they're taking more away than when you're kind of asking them to skim over the entire chapter and learn a lot of different things, right? And so, again, we'll talk about kind of how I get around that as well. It is time intensive for both students and faculty. There can be, if you're not careful, there can be a little bit of subjectivity in grading, and bias can occur. There is the problem of uneven group participation if you are doing these projects in groups, and then there are some equity concerns that I'll discuss. So I wanted to talk about grades first because I think this is really important in addressing like grade bias and subjectivity. So my grades, even though the projects do require creativity, like I will tell them that they should create a visually appealing infographic or brochure, but I don't grade them on that, right? Because it has nothing to do with my objectives or my slows. And I really only grade based on, you know, content and stuff like that. So if they turn something in with minimal visuals, or it's not colorful, or it's not the prettiest, right? I don't take points off. I don't take points off for that. I also don't take points off for like not being able to problem solve. So if I have a student who just can't figure out how to upload their video and I tell them, okay, we'll put it on YouTube and then copy paste the link into the discussion board so that way I have access to some recording, I'm not going to like deduct points for that, right? I want them to problem solve, but if they can't, like I'll help them figure it out. And then group participation. So the majority of my projects are individual. I do encourage participation, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide, but I don't grade based on group participation because I know that gets really messy and students complain about, you know, uneven workloads and whatnot. So this is really mainly individually based. What I do grade on is content mastery, and I have a very precise rubric to make sure that there is like super limited room for bias. So my students get, and this is like, I could do like a whole nother training on this, right? Grading for equity. My students receive a checklist for every single project that they have to do. And I literally will tell them, I am going to look at this checklist. Like if I, if I say, talk about this theory and use 3 stages or steps, and you only have 2, I'm going to leave that check mark unchecked, and I'll give you an opportunity to go back and fix it, but you won't get credit for that piece of the rubric, right? And so it limits the amount of like, well, they did good, so I guess I'll give them a good grade, right? There's no room for that. Enrique, you had a question?
Yes, actually, since you're talking about rubrics, I was asked on a private chat if you can share one of your rubrics for authentic assessments.
Yeah, so when I finish this, I would most definitely I'll put the checklist in for one of my classes.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, of course. And then obviously slows and objectives, did they meet the student learning outcome? And if not, like how can we work on that, right? So that's how I get around grade subjectivity. A couple of the other solutions. So you'll notice that in the video that I created, there were 2 learning objectives for that particular project that I was creating. All of my projects use 2 to 3 learning objectives. So usually for each chapter, there'll be 5 to 6 learning objectives, and then I'll try to like bunch together 2 to 3 per project. So that way I'm capturing more of the chapter and more of the content. Workload clarity, this is huge, right? So one of the professors talked, one of the folks who shared earlier said that some students want to come into class and they want to passively be able to sit down and listen to lecture and memorize facts and regurgitate them onto a multiple choice test. I make sure that students know, like there is a big disclaimer in my syllabus that says these projects are time intensive. They are going to take you time to put together. I do not have any multiple choice quizzes or exams. I don't offer extra credit because I let students redo things if they don't get it right the first time. But the workload is there, and then they need to be like cognizant of that before taking the class. And they even have to take a syllabus quiz that like literally has that disclaimer in it. Like, by continuing the class, I recognize that these projects will take so many hours to complete, and I agree to I agree to that workload just to make sure that they've read it right, because not all students read the syllabi. Um, so I talked about the fact that I don't do group work because it gets messy, but I did discuss how I have them participate in class. So in the in-person classes, they're going to get together, they're going to sit and talk about these projects. I even might have them do like a little reflection on I'll create like a reflection on Google Forms or whatever, where they can, you know, reflect on what they learned from having their group member explain their project. And so there is participation points in my in-person and hybrid classes. For my async classes, participation is, did you watch the videos on the discussion boards and did you respond thoughtfully to them, right? Did you answer all of the questions for that reflection? So I do have forms of participation, but it's, you know, I don't like force group work on people. And then flexibility, this is especially important for like equity, right? So I know that, you know, all of my students have different situations. And some of them will come to me and go, you know, this class is a lot. I work full time. I have a family. You know, I'm a caregiver for my parents. I'm dealing with some mental health stuff. And so in my classroom, like I said, students can redo these assignments to get full credit. So, you know, they aren't feeling like they're like left out in the wind, right? Like, well, this project was a lot of work and I did everything that I wanted to, you know, I did everything that you asked and then I didn't get credit for whatever reason, right? So flexibility. The other thing with equity is technology, right? So if they're recording videos or you know, if they have to create something where they need the internet, like on Canva or on Publisher, I give them lots of resources. Okay, so you don't have great Wi-Fi at home, you can come to the library and you can use the computers there. You don't have like a recording device, you can borrow a webcam from the library, or every student that I've ever met has a smartphone, right? There's recording feature on your smartphone, and you can use that if you want to. Zoom is free through our district, right? And I think it's free for all the California community colleges, I want to say. And so you can share your screen and talk about your project on Zoom and record it through there and turn it in that way. I do try to give them a lot of options because I want them to feel like they're in a classroom that supports their needs, whatever those are. And then for the time intensivity for faculty, right? Because this is a lot of work for us to grade, right? These projects, they take a lot of time. What I have learned is that oral feedback is so much easier than written feedback. And I use the little recorder on Canvas. There's like if you've never used it before, if you look right below the comment section, there is like there's a thing that you can record your face, but you can also just record your voice. Like you can turn your camera off. So usually I'm in my pajamas when I'm grading. So I'll just turn the camera off and I'll leave them like a 60-second voice note that lets them know exactly what they need to improve their projects so that they can get they can earn credit for it. So that really saves me so much time. Like it's cut my grading in literal half, which has been really nice. And yeah, that's pretty much it for authentic assessment. Does anybody have any questions, comments, anything that they'd like to share? All right. So
Actually, real
yeah.
quick, do you think that authentic assessments somewhat of the the objectives correlate to direct assessments or interact?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Do you think the authentic assessments uh, somewhat interact with or differentiate from direct assessments?
I mean, that's a good question.
Okay, so if I may here, I think that the direct assessment is the observation, right? There's also indirect assessment, which is like an after class survey kind of a thing, right? So these are the two different ways of looking at assessment. Authentic is the spectrum, or this is the phenomena here that we are observing, right? So it can be done directly or indirectly. I think that will be the distinction. So in other words, direct or indirect, that's a way we observe the phenomena, whereas the phenomena is authentic assessment itself. Does it make
Yeah.
sense?
So the question is, do I think that authentic assessment is a form of direct assessment, or I guess I'm trying to like
Right. So that's why it's difficult to, yeah, go ahead, Enrique. Sorry. Maybe you have
Yeah,
something.
no, I think you're hitting my way, Jarek. Is I was hitting more to Jarek's the indirect versus the direct of
Mm.
yeah. But
uh, yeah, I don't know. Don't know how to answer that. I
I
don't
don't
know.
know.
Does anybody else in the audience have thoughts? I'd love to hear your take on it.
This is Linda. I teach at the College of Information and Cyberspace at the National Defense University, and we do a lot of authentic assessments here. We do war games, things like that. And we consider authentic assessments to be direct assessments
That's right.
because we are actively watching and seeing what the students are doing. We have a rubric to evaluate behavior. So we don't constitute it as indirect at all. Over.
thank you so much.
Any other questions? Okay. Okay, so just one last thing before I head out. This is where you can find me. Please, if you liked what you saw today or you just want to connect with me, I love just having some of these conversations with professors who are doing similar things or maybe who are interested in learning more. You can find my website, my podcast, and then this is also a link to my video tutorials. If you have an Instagram handle, like I'm not on Instagram a ton, but I do like to post some relatable content every once in a while, or you can just email me directly at professoraberry@gmail.com. And like I said, happy to start up a conversation with you and exchange best practices. And I thank all of you for your time and for kind of hanging out. I will hop onto my Canvas and I will download that checklist that I told you that I created, and I'll put it in the chat while the next speaker goes, in case you're interested in learning about what my very specific rubrics look like. Thank you so much.